This is Mrs. Wayner's Math Class, Chapters 6, 7, and 8, Packet B, Prerequisite, Fraction Review. This is an example of a fraction, 1/2. A fraction has a number with a line on top of another number. If you're writing it on lined paper, your top number should be on one line, your fraction bar should be drawn over the blue line, and your bottom number should be on a different line. Let's take a look at this fraction. The top number in the fraction is called the numerator. Say it with me, numerator. The bottom number in the fraction is called the denominator. Say it with me, denominator. How do I remember the two? Well, I remember denominator starts with a D for down because it's the number that's down of the two of them. Numerator is my top number, my down number is my denominator. I also have this line in between the two numbers, and that is called my fraction bar. Let's take a look at what this fraction would look like if it was a Hershey bar. Here is my whole Hershey bar. In my fraction, my denominator tells me how many pieces it takes to make a whole bar. So if my denominator is 2, that means it would take 2 pieces to make a whole Hershey bar. There are my 2 pieces that show my denominator, right? 2 pieces make the whole bar. My numerator tells me how many pieces I'm talking about or how many pieces I have. In this case, my numerator is 1, so it says I have 1 of those 2 pieces. I've shaded in what I have. I have 1 of the 2 pieces that it takes to make the whole Hershey bar. 2 pieces to make a whole bar, and I have 1 of them. So again, my denominator always tells me how many pieces it takes to make 1 whole bar, and my numerator tells me how many pieces we have or how many pieces we're talking about. Fractions may look different but still be equivalent. Equivalent means that they're equal to each other. So the question here says how much of each chocolate bar is shaded. Well, let's take a look at my first chocolate bar, the one on the top. Well, my denominator tells me how many pieces it takes to make a whole. In the chocolate bar on the top, how many pieces does it take to make 1 whole bar? I'll put my fraction bar. It takes 2 pieces. How many are shaded, which is what I'm talking about? 1 piece is shaded. So my top picture shows 1/2 of a Hershey bar. Let's take a look at my middle Hershey bar. How many pieces does it take to make the whole Hershey bar? It takes 4, so I'll put that as my denominator. And how many pieces are shaded, which is what I'm talking about? 2. That will become my numerator. So 2/4 of this Hershey bar is shaded. But compare that to 1/2. Even though 2 pieces are shaded, it's still the same amount of chocolate overall. You can see that from the picture. Let's take a look at my bottom chocolate bar. How many pieces does it take to make a whole? It takes 8 pieces to make a whole. How many are shaded? 4 pieces are shaded. So my bottom Hershey bar has 4/8 of the Hershey bar shaded. But again, you can see that all 3 of these pictures have the exact same amount or quantity of chocolate shaded. They're equivalent. Some may be larger pieces, some may be smaller pieces, but if you compare them together, each bar has the same amount of chocolate shaded. So 1/2, 2/4, and 4/8 are all equal to each other or equivalent. It's the same amount of chocolate. What's the proper way to read a fraction? I read my numerator as is, 1. My denominator, if it's a 2, I say half, or if it's more than 1, I would say halves, make it plural. So this is 1/2. If I have another fraction that looks like this, I would read my numerator is exactly the number I see, 2, and most of my denominators get read as though that's your order in line. So if I'm number 3 in line, I would say that I'm 3rd. So this fraction is read as 2/3. This fraction, numerator stays the same, 3. If I was number 4 in line, I would be 4th. So we read this as 3/4. If my numerator is 2, I say it as is, 2. If I'm number 5 in line, I'd be 5th in line. So I read this as 2/5. In this fraction, 5/6, numerator is 5. Denominator is 6. If I was number 6 in line, we would say I was 6th in line. So we read this as 5/6. 21 over 35. 21 stays the same. Denominator, if I was 35 in line, you would say I was 35th in line. So it's 21 35ths. 10 over 47. 10 stays the same. If I was number 47 in line, you would say I was 47th in line. So it's 10 47ths. 35 over 82. We read 35. And if I was number 82 in line, you would say I was the 82nd person in line. So it's 35 82nds. 17 over 23. Numerator stays the same, 17. Denominator, if I was number 23 in line, you would say I was 23rd in line. So we read it 17 23rds. And our last example, 50. Numerator stays the same. Denominator, if I was number 100 in line, you would say I was the 100th person in line. So we read this as 50 100ths. So the only exception to the rule here is the 1 over 2. When my denominator is 2, we say half. 1 half, 2 halves. Every other fraction, when I read the numerator as is, and the denominator as it's that place in line. 2/3, 3/4, 2/5, 5/6, 21 35ths, 10 47ths, 35 82nds, 17 23rds, and 50 100ths.